All right, howdy folks, I think we're live. Let me check on YouTube here. Yes, I think we're good. All right, so let me just check the chat, see if it's working. I kind of have this wonky layout today that I threw together on my main PC just a while ago. It'd be cool if it would pop up. It should. Hopefully it does. All right, there it is. All right, so hey, how's it going, Sean? All right, so this is a bit of a new setup here. I got my camera here, I got some lights, so it should be a little bit more visual today. Got our music going, I think. Yeah. All right, so today's stream is going to be about just kind of some thoughts I had about what I'm trying to do with the pre-alpha kind of build. There's a number of things that I want to accomplish with the pre-alpha build that that I've kind of been looking forward to, but I lost the sound. Oh. Okay. Yeah, so Sean muted his phone or whatever, and so I'm wondering why I'm getting output on my OBS, but Sean can't hear it. So I was just saying that I just wanted to talk about what I had planned for the kind of the pre-alpha, I guess what I'm calling it. So the main stuff that I wanted to look at as we get through this real quick. I really wanted to, more than anything, I wanted to actually get a build in people's hands. How's it going, Z64? I wanted to get a build into people's hands so that they can, so I can start to get, I can start to get feedback that's based on the user and not just kind of what I need for functionality. Sometimes I'll be like programming, trying to get something to work, and you know, as long as it works, I'm done. But you know, there's a whole process that has to take place to make sure that what you make is actually, you know, worthwhile. So the biggest things were, well, it was that actually getting feedback from actual players from the stuff that's in the game currently. Some of the stuff that I wanted to run by is like basically just like the roster building. Sean says, I'm trying to play guitar and watch, so my brain got overwhelmed and muted the YouTube video. Well, I guess that's what you get for multitasking. I wanted to kind of run by how it feels to like manage the roster. Like, because to me that's what I think can be really interesting, is like actually managing the players, looking at numbers, you know, seeing what kind of strategic decisions people are going to make. What are they going to think about? Some of the stuff that you see, it's all functional, but it's not like really, like, I don't know how it's really going to be perceived, you know? So like the roster building stuff, like applying coach actions. Like, how do players feel about those? How does that affect how you see the roster? Looking at coach abilities, same thing. Also UI navigation, which I guess we'll get into a little bit later. But I feel like there's here. Why that's happening. I feel like there's enough here to actually, you know, play around with and make strategic decisions. But and sometimes when I go through this stuff, you know, I think about how long it took me to write it and to like hammer it out, and it doesn't seem like a lot, but let's see. I guess another thing that I wanted to look at was the UI navigation. Like it's pretty straightforward, you know. It's not anything you haven't seen before. I think it's visually appealing. I don't know how people are going to take it, you know. Because it's not a it doesn't use the mouse at all. So it's purely, I guess, button based. I mean, I think it's pretty cool, but like certain areas where it may not be clear how you navigate certain parts of the screen. Like I have these little button hints, and they're for the keyboard right now. Eventually, I want to have actual icons of buttons. But for now, I just have text that changes based on what the screen is. Tristan says, looking forward to this game. The retro feel and depth. Yeah, as far as depth, kind of what I've been doing is like I see it as buckets. Like I'm kind of building out the buckets, like what their shape is going to be and where they are and how many there are. And then as time goes on, I want to make the buckets deeper and deeper and deeper. So this is just the very beginning of it. So I mean, of course, later on, I want to have a lot of depth to the game, but not necessarily complexity. But the plan for what I want to do over the next couple months is obviously to test the stuff that's there, but to start adding the college and the pro screens. And there really aren't that many. I mean, there's a few, but to get like all the basic stuff for a college and pro, it's really mainly for college. It's recruiting, maybe some transfers, and like the postseason logic for the bowl games and like how the playoffs work and everything. And for the pro screens, you got the draft, trading, and free agency. Those are probably the biggest ones that I'm going to be focusing on. How's it going, Marquis? So I want to add the college and the pro screens, and then I wanted to get into a play calling system. Now for the play calling, it's still a little bit weird because I don't have a field engine yet. Like I have the beginnings of an animation engine, but it's not playable right now. So I'm kind of thinking about, you know, what is the thing that I want to do. Like, do I want to have like a sim animate engine that simulates outcomes and then animates them, not real time? Or do I want to have like a very simple real-time engine? So I think there's pros and cons to both. I'm really leaning towards like a sim animate engine, just because I'm really worried about the outcomes. I guess I can show you guys. Let's see what we got here. We have some videos. Let me pull these up. If you're on X, then you've seen these. But let's switch our window to, where is it? This. All right, so this is what the what my field animation looks like right now. It's, you can't really tell from this distance, but the player models are they kind of look like an N64 kind of Dreamcast almost type model. But from far away, they kind of look pretty realistic. But from up close, you can tell that they're not like super modern looking. What's going on, David? So this is what the animation engine looks like right now. There's no like field logic going on right now. It's mainly just players getting routes and then the QB throwing to a player, and then the linemen are just running towards each other and going into a definitely not blocking animation. So I think it looks believable. You know, if the tackling, like the player interaction, was presentable, I think it would be okay. What I'm more worried about is like all the presentation stuff around it. Like as long as that is like compelling, for me personally, I think that's okay. But my question is, do I want to have an engine that is real time, or do I want to have an engine that simulates outcomes and then kind of has a choreography for the field? The reason why I'm leaning towards a sim animate engine is, like, if my engine fails in any way, this game is not going to be forgiving. Like, you can't load up a previous save. And the game is probably going to save in the middle of the game, too. So, like, if it's a crucial game or if it's a crucial down and there's a bug, I feel like the user's going to feel like it was unfair. At least if you had a real-time engine, or at least if you had previous saves you could load up when the game messes up, you feel like you have an out. But with a real-time engine, if it bugs out and you don't have saves, you know, you guys can see the problem there. So the upside of a sim animate engine is that it's easier. You kind of go around the whole real-time AI problem, and then what gets registered is the outcome from the simulation engine, and then the stuff that you see on the field is just as good of an approximation as it can get, you know. So the visual part is just an accessory to the actual outcomes. So because you can skirt around the real-time unpredictability, you can basically guarantee correct outcomes. And so if the game is unforgiving and you have to accept whatever happens during the game. You can't load previous saves. At least you know that the game's not going to bug out and cheat you out of an important game or something. Let's look at the chat here. Z64 says, it kind of reminds me of the walkthroughs we used to do day before. Talking about like studying film because of the high up view. I can see that. John says, if you use a sim animate engine, you can also use that for fast sims. Just eliminate the animation part and you have a one engine system. That's actually what I had just a while ago before, or just a couple of days ago, before I wrote what I call my spare tire fast sim. The problem was that it has a lot of variables and it needs a lot of tweaking. It could complete a game logically and it would produce stats, but it would go play by play. It would take into account like coverage types and all this stuff. And it would also log everything. It would take the formation of the players or of the teams. It would take who was in the formation during that play. It would store that, and then I could take that, or eventually I would be able to take those plays and be able to play out the game for highlights. The problem with that is it was really heavy, and I wrote it in GDScript, which is like Python basically. And so I don't know how much of a performance loss I get writing it in GDScript versus like C# or something like that. So it was way too heavy. It wasn't egregious, but to get through like 32 to 64 games, it took a couple minutes. And for testing purposes, like you want to get through the games quickly. So that was the main issue with that. But that's what I had. That was my plan, is to have one engine. Tristan says, looks like a good start. Gives me Football Manager vibes. They're 3D sims. I haven't really played Football Manager, but man, it seems like a successful game. So to be compared to that, I think is probably a good thing. Z64 says, that's what I already do with the games that exist. You're talking about like not saving or not loading previous saves. Although with Madden 2002, I remember one time someone caught a touchdown pass, but the defender forced it out and the game called it a fumble. I see stuff like that. Even with like AAA titles, the real-time engine, depending on how tight it is, still a small chance of errors. Even if the engine doesn't necessarily break, even if like there's like a quirk about the AI. Like I know in like NFL 2K5, I never experienced game-breaking bugs. Sometimes the way the players kind of turn and they kind of allow certain players past them, sometimes that would cause scenarios where I felt like logically they should have been able to tackle that player, but the engine says that they get through. I think this is a different video. There's no, this is an earlier one. What was I saying? Madden. Yeah, so with AAA games, sometimes there's a small chance of errors. And so for me, not having the resources to make, the success rate of a Madden 2002 or something more recent, I have to think about that. Z64 says it was during a custom league we made, so it just corrected it with the situation mode. Okay. I guess that makes sense. You can kind of set up a game in a certain condition Yeah. And so that's kind of what I was thinking about with the field engine was what exactly do I want to do with that? Now I don't have a final answer, and this will be the last thing I say about the field engine, is that if I did make a field engine, I don't necessarily want to do it by myself. Like if I'm going to set out to make a field engine, my very first like serious real-time engine, I kind of want to, you know, maybe work with someone else, or I'm not sure exactly what the solution is there, but if I go at it alone, I feel like I'm not going to be able to produce something compelling enough. And so that's another reason why I want to just animate the outcomes. So let me pull up something about the play calling system. Let's see. I'm thinking of Action PC Football, and it's kind of an obscure game. I know Sean knows about it. Look up a video real quick of Action PC. Action PC Football is a text, like a text sim for computer, obviously. Let's see. All right, here's one. I'm gonna pull this over here. I'm gonna get rid of this video, or this field video. What we got? There is... So tough. This one? Oh. Nope, that's me. Where it is? Oh, there it is. All right. So this is Action PC Football. I just wanted to show you guys the play calling kind of concept that I'm thinking of. I don't necessarily want to have a play calling system that's just you pick three plays like 2K, like Madden, like Quarterback Club, like all the all the standard football games. Mainly because I didn't want to worry about having to make a bunch of plays that are untested, and because if there's no real-time field engine, what a play means actually changes, so you kind of have to abstract it out. So let's see if I can. So this interface is a little clustered. But if you look at, let's see if it can show me the offense. They're on defense right now. All right, here's offense. Let me take a look at the chat real quick. Sean says, I have the same thoughts about a solid real-time engine. I need at least another person or two before I take that on. Yeah, that's how I feel. Like, I think about, man, I think about, like, you, and I think about Havo. Like, the amount of work that Havo's put into that engine, like, it's a good engine. For one person, it's a good engine. You can simulate football with that. You can bolt that onto any indie football game. Maybe change the sprites or whatever. and you have an effective engine. Like it's good. But even a good real-time engine is susceptible to errors because, you know, you don't have the resources to, you know, to make it near perfect like a big budget title can. And so I don't want to put in all that work into something that I feel like I don't really have experience in, just for that engine to be trashed by, you know, the peanut gallery. Like, I know the engine's not perfect, and so I just don't want to deal with that. Like, I want at least another person to help me with that. Z64 says, I saw that it existed, but that's about it. Sean says, you need an animator for sure. Probably two. I think, like, I keep talking about Game Day, like 2005 on the PS1. Like, it's a solid engine. Like, I'm sure it messes up just like any other, but it's like, it feels like it's simple enough. Like, the AI probably isn't that complex, but I feel like the AI beats me sometimes, and I feel like I can beat the AI sometimes. And like, the running feels good, the blocking feels good enough, especially during run plays. The passing feels good. Like, once you kind of get used to the gameplay feel, it's fun. And it's not overly realistic, but it's not necessarily like Blitz. It has a little bit of Blitz in it, but not a lot. So if I could get something close to that and just maybe have slightly better models, and even if the animations were the same, maybe have, you know, give them a higher frame rate, I think it would be a solid target, you know. Z64 says, I kind of like the QB Club one where you pick the like concepts for each position group and it had the slider. Yeah, that's actually one game that I looked at, and I was kind of, it started to give me ideas. Like, it was, yeah, you would pick concepts and you would kind of form the play. So you kind of made up your play every single down, but it wasn't like you had to draw the routes and you had to draw like where the player blitzes and all that, because that would take forever. You don't necessarily want to run a play editor every single down. You want something that can pick concepts that are relative to your, like, to your coach and to your players and to your scheme and everything. But you want it to be quick. You want to have options, but you don't want to take forever. And one of the things that I liked about this kind of play calling concept is that it gave you all these numbers. Now, I don't want to have necessarily like all these numbers showing, but the fact that you knew exactly what the probability of success was. Like, if you were going to target Lance here at wide receiver, if you're going to do a short cross, your completion percentage chance was a 66.8 with, you know, a route of 14.1 and all this stuff, touchdown 0.5%. And so every situation things change, and you knew like how to manage your risk. And I feel like this is a little bit too much because you only end up picking from a few of these options anyway. You usually pick the highest completion percentage, or if you need more yards, you pick one that has a higher chance for a higher route, a longer route. But I like that you knew exactly where the ball was going. For run plays, you would pick from a couple different run concepts, and then that would be based off of obviously the situation, and then whoever was getting the ball. So I just really like that. And a lot of the stuff are just like surrounding stats, so you don't really need to see all that. But I'm thinking of something that's like that has like the simplicity visually of picking from 3 plays like you do in Madden or 2K, but what you're doing is something closer to this, to where you're picking from concepts, and your strategy is like, imagine like a board with knobs on it, and you're kind of just tweaking the board, the knobs to what you're trying to do every single play. But the options are not too much to where it takes forever, but it's enough to where you have a back and forth with strategy. And so that's kind of my idea of where I think I want the play calling to go. That's something that I want to be able to nail down in these next couple months when we start the pre-alpha build testing. That'll probably be something that I do after I get the college and pro screens in. That'll probably be like the end piece. And once I get to that stage, I'm going to call that an alpha build, where we have high school, college, and pro screens, all the basic ones in. And we have a play calling system. That way, at the very least, I can run something like this, where I have a play calling system and I have some kind of visual component. Even if it looks like this, just for the sake of an alpha, I think that'd be a good spot. And then after that, making whatever the field component's going to be. Once that's done, I'm going to call that the beta. So Z64 says, the engine really depends on your goals. Do you want to stay with the management thing for a while, or do you want to make a normal Simcade style game at some point, or at least have it possible? Oh, that's a great question. I don't want to make a Simcade game. I don't want player control. It's just not something that's just not going to be a part of game design. Because I feel like that's been explored enough. Not that games shouldn't do that more. I think there should be a million, arcade style football games, but I'm imagining something different. So I'm looking more at like team management, but also like the adventure aspect of going through an entire career. And that's not something that's going to be evident in the at first. It's not going to feel like an adventure. It's going to feel like your like early 2000s, late 90s sports games that had kind of simplistic team management styles. Maybe a little bit of RPG, well, ideally a lot of RPG elements. I am calling it an RPG, so ideally I'd want there to be an adventure aspect to it, to where it feels like an adventure game. It's not just number crunching. And in order to achieve that, I'm going to have, characters that you can talk to have like a dialogue system, for that to be meaningful, for there to be things to like discover and explore in the game. For that, you need like an actual world to move in. Now, none of that's going to be present, probably not even in like the version 1 of the game. That stuff is going to be added on later. And that's really going to be where I focus on the adventure aspect. So I don't think a Simcade style gameplay on the field is really conducive to this game design. I think it's something that emphasizes strategy a lot more. but not overwhelming, you know? C64 says, I feel management games mostly can get away with predetermined animated plays, is why I ask. Yeah, it's not going to be like if you have predetermined animated plays, then you don't have a real-time control, so that's already cut out. Tristan says, I'd recommend checking out Football Manager and Out of the Park Baseball. Both have gone from 2D sim like this to 3D sims. Yeah, that is a transition that I've seen those games make. And those games are excellent for what they are. I'm not a huge fan of I feel like they inundate you with information. And for me personally, that's not necessarily game style that I want. I know there's a lot of people that like them, and more power to them. But something about like the adventure aspect is really, for me, where I want to take the game. Go back to the game here. Let's go back to... There we go. Tristan says, both give you control of tactics and strategy, but not control of players. I'm not saying take the style, but take ideas for your engine. Yeah. I guess I'm imagining something that isn't necessarily all about the numbers. Like, obviously you need numbers because it's a sports game. And for the sports game to be relevant at all in the genre, you need numbers, I think. I don't necessarily want you to be always crunching numbers, always, you know, making meticulous little number comparisons like, oh, an 83 is better than an 82 and all this stuff. So you obviously need that in the game, but I'm just thinking of something that's completely, that falls more in the realm of RPG than your traditional sports game. And so, just for an example, like, eventually I'd like for there to be a headquarters / campus thing where that's kind of like every team has their own little physical game world, and it's like the buildings of like the facilities and the, you know, if it's a college, if it's a high school team, you have the high school. If it's a college team, you have the college campus. If it's a pro team, it's the headquarters, and, you know, obviously the city that it's in. And so I'm thinking of games like Daggerfall, like Elder Scrolls Daggerfall, or Elder Scrolls 2. Elder Scrolls 2 is actually a big game, but it packs it all in kind of like random generation. If you ever looked at the map of Daggerfall, it's a giant map with a bunch of little dots on it. Each dot is a city. Now it's a game from the 90s or whenever, and so the cities aren't super elaborate, but each one is a unique location. And so I'm imagining something like that, to where each and every team has their own little location. And then maybe you can go, like, even if you're not necessarily at that team, you can go to nearby team headquarters and, you know, talk to people and find things out, and have it be like, you know, it's not an accessory to this, like the main team management stuff. It's an integral part of the game. And so imagine that, but it's obviously set in the 90s. And so it's an expansive thing that I'm not going to be able to do at the beginning, but that's just like a small idea of where I plan to take the game. And I have no idea if if that in sports is viable as a mixture. But personally, I don't really care because I want to play the game. And I think there will be enough people that will want to play the game too, with that sort of mixture of things that we haven't seen in a sports context before. You're starting to see a little bit of it now with like 2K having like the city, and obviously EA is going to have to copy that in Madden or whatever. But that's like an online thing, and I'm not thinking of like a hub world. I'm thinking of like a fully fleshed out game world. But what's Tristan saying? I understand the RPG aspect seems like the fun part. Z64 says, in APF 2K8 they had a lot of hidden player ratings that were also tied to abilities, so you'd still vaguely know who was good at what. Yeah, the thing about 2K8 though is that they did have player ratings, but they masked it in player skills. Most of the player skills were just a reference to how much a rating was. Like if you had quick feet or whatever, then, or let's say you were like a silver running back, you probably had 80 speed. So they still had, it obviously still runs on numbers. You kind of need those numbers, but they made it to where you weren't thinking about, you know, oh, this guy has 80 speed, this guy has 81 speed, or this guy has 83 speed. It didn't force you to make those kind of minor distinctions. They kind of just took that away from you and just said, okay, this guy's fast, this guy's faster, or this guy's slow, this guy's slower, or this guy can throw really far, this guy's really accurate. And so it kind of simplified your decision making, and it made it more noticeable because there were greater increments in the tier of skills. But speaking of skills, like for my characters we have traits. I gotta go, wait, where's my depth chart? I guess I have to go past this. Here's my loading bar. Should probably talk about all this stuff, but I think I've talked about it enough. So we got traits and abilities. And speaking of hidden skills, Z64, the players do have a number of hidden attributes. They're mainly for the traits though. Like for example, feeble, that means that he's more susceptible to losing more health. If he was tough, he would be more resistant to losing health. And then if he didn't have either of those, then he's just normal. So the number values for those right now are 50, 100, and 25. So there's a high and low variation. So I like that because you'll be able to tell the difference immediately. You don't have to wonder like, is this really different or is it not? Because it's just 3 values. So there are hidden values that you can't see, but not like 2K8 to where they would just hide their skills from the user. And then we have abilities. Most of the player abilities are situational. So, because I was thinking like, what kind of abilities could players have? It's not like a fantasy game where you can shoot fireballs and you can fly and you can transform into a dragon or whatever. you have to stay in the realm of possibility, and there's really not a lot of things that players can really do differently. I know like college football 25 really tries to stretch out like all the different player abilities, but there's really not that many things. You know, you can run fast, you can throw the ball a certain way, or maybe you're good at telling what the other team's play is. There's not that many things. And so I was thinking, like, I can't just have the abilities be like unique actions. There's a few of them, but there's not a lot. And so what I made the abilities out to be, they do affect player skills, but it's situational. So for example, let's see if I can find somebody. Okay. So for example, William has road player, catch up, third down man, hand dive. Now that's a lot. For some reason, it keeps producing a max of 4, even though I told it 3. So I'm not sure what's going on with that. But so for example, a road player. What that's going to mean is that he gets like a small percentage boost when he plays away games. Catch up will be, I forget if that's a boost to, I think it's the same thing, but in like the last quarter of the game or something like that. Third down man means that he's better at catching. He gets like +3 catching on third downs. Dive, I think, is a reference to running. And so like when it's down and goal, you get +3 running. And so it is simple additions to skills, but it's situational. And so it forces you to think, okay, this player is better in this situation. This player is better in this other situation. And so everyone has like a gadget. Well, not everyone. Some players have no abilities. But you have, like, this guy's a road player and he's a pass blocker. So that what that means is that he gets +3 blocking on passing plays. Yeah. You know, come back and third down wall means that he gets plus blocking on third downs. Third down blitz, comeback, acrobat. So you can make catches when the ball is thrown badly, clutch. So, you know, you can see all of these, most of them are situational. And so it produces different vectors or different angles to look at players. So this is the kind of thing, even though it's not necessarily implemented with respect to like field outcomes, as a person who's testing the game, you're going to be able to see how different players can be evaluated. You can say, well, I like that this player is clean, so you know, his chance of producing a penalty is lower, so that can be valuable. This guy's a pushover and he's a little bit weaker. He's feeble, so you have to think about that. He has no abilities, but he has 8 running, right? Let's take a look at the chat before he gets away from me. Tristan says the number crunching is boring after a while. Oh, it gets boring very quickly for me. Like if I see a screen that's like top to bottom full of numbers, and like every corner has like some interface widget, it's just like, that's why like Under the Park Baseball, from the stuff I've seen, is a little bit like that, and it's too much. This is something that Havos talked about. I don't know if Sean is still watching. he's mentioned that sometimes he'll go into a football game and like he doesn't know, like it's not obvious like what you're supposed to do. There's too many knobs in on the screen, so to speak. Like what screen do I go to? What do I do here? You know, it's not obvious because there's just so many options. And instead of that, what I'm trying to do is to kind of streamline it to where it all comes to the user directly, more or less. And so it shows you a screen. It's like, okay, do X, Y, and Z. All right, here's the next screen. Do X, Y, and Z. Here's the next screen. So it just kind of puts it in your face. And that's what you have to do at that moment, particularly during the off season. So you're never wondering like, okay, where do I go? So that's something that I focused on. Tristan says, make what you want to play, they will come. That's kind of my goal. I feel like I'm not making just like an obscure game, because I feel like it has a lot of marketability from like a number of different vectors. Like you have the fact that it's a football game, that gives it something. You know, the market isn't saturated, so it's more visible. It's set, visually set in the 90s, and so it has that sort of nostalgic appeal for a certain demographic. And I wasn't doing it out of novelty. It's something that appeals to me. So that's where that came from. Like I looked at obviously the 2K football games and mostly those, but also older games from Sony like Game Day and Game Breaker. But a lot of it came from just watching old football games and like watching the way they had the TV graphics packages, and like watching NFL Primetime with Chris Berman and College Game Day, and just looking at the announcers back then. And it's just a certain thing that really is really appealing, that games from the time kind of touched, especially ones that had like a ESPN license. But there's really no games that really hammer in on like that aesthetic, and so that was a big focus. Then obviously like the RPG aspects. I think there's a lot of people that don't necessarily care a lot about football games, but they like the strategy, they like the RPG aspect, and so you know there's different ways to find appeal that way. So I think it's appealing on multiple fronts, not just, you know, here's the latest indie Madden clone that's going to fail, right? Z64 says, so it's almost like in certain situations, it's sort of comparable to a player having in his mind what he needs to do in that situation. Yeah, that's kind of what I had in mind with the abilities, is I want players to feel like they have gadgets and they're not just an 87 or a 75, and that you think about them more situationally, because that's how it's done in real life. You know, certain players are better in certain situations, and so the way it's implemented is pretty simple, but as long as it's effective to put your players that are situationally better in that situation, then I think the problem solves itself. Baseball in general is very number crunch oriented. Probably with the advent of, what's it called? Moneyball. Like the whole stat analytics and everything. Probably. Let's see. So Oh, another thing that I wanted to the testers to look at is how does it feel like to be limited in the things you can do depending on who has that specific role. So for example, here, this is training. This is off-season training. So the offense, so it's pretty basic right now. The offense is controlled by the offensive coordinator and the defense is controlled by the defensive coordinator. And these aren't just random. They all have, each coach has their profile of when they want to put players on certain training plans. And so sometimes like you'll want to, well, let me start over. These different duties, because like if you play Madden, if you play 2K, or if you play Quarterback Club or Game Day or all those games, with the exception of some of the later NCAA football games, you could do everything. And there wasn't a lot to do, so it didn't make sense design-wise to limit you. And so, but this game is going to limit you in that, like, the coordinators, they want to do a certain amount of tasks, and then so you have to balance that. So some coordinators are going to want more tasks, some are going to want less. So if you're the head coach and you want to delegate more, you're going to have to hire coordinators that are closer to the amount of things that you want to delegate. If you want to be more of a, if you want to be more in control, you're going to want to hire coordinators that are less, that want less responsibility. And so there's like that actual feeling of being in a place where you're limited by other people's desires, I guess. This is something that I don't know if it recently broke, but the past couple times I've passed through here, I haven't seen any AI changes to the weight. I'll have to look at that later. So, same thing, you know, the offensive coordinator controls the weight room for the offense, and the defense is controlled by the defensive coordinator. Sometimes it'll be the head coach for one or the other, or it might be both, you know, who knows. Tristan says, analytics, yeah. Games for you says, how's it going? Pretty good. Just hanging out, talking about the game. Alright, so hopefully this doesn't break. Yeah, okay, so we made it. Let's see what else we have. I guess one more thing about the players that I was thinking about taking a look at in testing is the actual player skills. I think it's so cool to see the AIs apply their abilities to the different players. Pretty neat. But specifically about the player abilities or the skills, they're currently on a 30-point scale. And I know that's kind of weird for a sports game. My rationale behind that was, it was because of a few different things. It was because I didn't want players to feel like they were just racing through their skills. I wanted players to feel like they had a certain nature to them, like a player was kind of uniquely their set of numbers. And so they could obviously improve, but not like drastically. And so, like for example, this guy Cameron, because it's on a 30-point scale, I feel like it's a little bit easier to read. So this guy has 9 blocking, right, with the equipment bonus. So I look at that 9 and I see, okay, that guy's pretty good for high school, right? Because if you think about it in 3 tiers, you know, you got 10 is kind of the ceiling for high school, or that's about where you'd say that's a really good player, and then 20 for college, and then 30 for pro. So that makes sense. It's easy to read the skills, and then they don't change a lot because there's not a lot of numbers to go through. And so it becomes more about gathering experience, you know, putting your players into actual games and making sure they have enough practice time. I like that about it. But the problem is that with like the team overalls, like this looks especially weird, right? Because it's a 6, a 6, a 6, a 7. And so coming from your traditional sports games, it kind of makes, you know, it's like, what does that mean? Is that good? Is that bad? The power bar here kind of helps you. You can see like more or less where very good would be, and then you're kind of in the first third of that, which makes sense for a high school team. But what I don't like is that because players' skills are kind of crunched so closely together because there's not a lot of numbers to use, the team overalls are very similar, and then it's hard to tell, you know, who is really better or worse compared to the others, because every team is kind of in this range. You know, they might have a 5, they might have a 6, maybe an 8 or 9 if they're really good. And so like the same concept applies, but it's, I think mentally it's kind of disturbing. So I'm thinking about going back to the 100-point scale. I wanted to use like a 30-point scale because it felt more like an RPG, because RPGs a lot of the time didn't have huge point scales. Some of them did, you know, some of them would let you go into the thousands. But I was thinking of more like a game more like Divinity, to where like a low number is probably like a 3, high number is like a 10, a 15, a 20, right? But some of the math just doesn't, it's harder to calculate, and I don't know. So that's another thing that I might be looking to go back to, is a 100-point scale. Once we get into the actual testing, which is going to be, hopefully we hit it exactly January 1st, maybe a couple days later, depending on what happens. Games for You says, so you have to start at the high school level first before moving up. Yes, that's the idea. You're actually not guaranteed to move up. It's not linear. You know, if it just so happens, you might never leave the high school level. It just depends on what happens. I definitely want the game to kind of expect you to at least get out of the high school level. But I'd also like it to be possible to not just by choice, but because like if you just make bad choices, or because, you know, the way the things happen in the game. Ideally, there's enough in the game to where you can have fun no matter where you go, and the higher you go, it's just, you know, the more fun you have. You know, that's kind of how I see that progression through the levels working. So let's see if we can get to the end of the season without breaking it. What does that do? A 3. Okay. So this sim time was actually a lot faster a couple hours ago, but I turned on the AI press conference, so it's doing that before the games. Like they're simulating their own little press conferences as well, which I didn't show you the press conference, but you can look back at older streams and see them. I could probably show some here in a little bit. So, got a letter. What we'll have to do, or what I'll have to do is, it's kind of running it like the user one would. It's just behind the scenes. So I'll probably have to kind of abstract it out. That way I can get rid of all the loops that's taking up time. But if you cut about that sim time in half, that's about what it takes to go through a whole season of about 15 games, including the postseason right now. Tristan says you could do different caps. High school skills at 30, college at 60, and pro at 90. Yeah, that's the way I envisioned it. That's the way Sean did it as well, which you may or may not be watching. The problem with that is that you can't if your scale of 100 points is 0 being utterly useless and 100 being flawless, like that first half, definitely that first third of point range is basically useless. So it doesn't really work out that way. You either have to you could kind of cheat it a little bit. You can map 50 to 100 onto like a new scale of 0 to 100, where 0 is 50 and 100 is 100, and so you're kind of just occupying the top half of the skill range. That way players aren't useless, you know. The problem with that is that you're just using a 50-point scale. So Sean has kind of come up with some solutions to that, to where as players move through the levels, their skills get modified with respect to the level that they're in. So Sean has a pro readiness rating, if I remember correctly, to where a college player, they could be like a 75 against college competition, but once they get to the pros, that pro readiness rating will affect their skills to where it changes a little bit. That way you can use a full scale and not have players be useless. So it's complicated. It's not as easy as just slapping points on. The solution that I came up with initially was for it to be based not on a scale of useless to flawless, but rather a scale of to be based on difference. So for example, a 75 versus a 60, there's a certain difference there. And so there's a certain performance gap that you'd expect. If you compare a 50 against a 30, that's an even bigger gap. If you compare a 20 against an 80, that's a very big gap, right? And so no player is useless. It just depends on what they're comparing against, right? It's that difference that's going to determine who gets the edge. So that's kind of what I came up with. It's a little tricky to implement because you have to fine tune like how big of a difference do you need to really get an edge. It's complicated, but there's definitely solutions to to the 100-point skill problem. Z64 says Madden used to use a 15-point scale on Sega, and John Madden did the ratings himself, so that's probably similar to how they did it. How they did the real scouting reports. I think it was Bill Walsh College Football. I wish I had the game box with me because they have the rosters in card form, like inside the actual box. It's a relic of the past because they probably didn't have enough space to store all the rosters inside the actual game, so they give you a paper with it, you know. But I think they use a 10-point scale in Bill Walsh. So some QBs had like an arm of 3 or throwing of 3. Some had like 7 or some had 1. So I'm not sure exactly how they compared the numbers to each other, but it was cool that they used that as so small of a scale, and they incorporated weight into strength. So when you would look up the offensive lineman or defensive lineman, it would just show you their weight. So it was like weight versus weight, which it's not totally accurate, but it was a cool way to do it. Basically using, I don't know, something like a 300-point scale, basically. Although most players were in the mid to upper 200s. But it was still cool how they did it, how they did that. Sire says, hey, how's it going? Z64 says, honestly, it still sims faster than I'm used to in the sports games I play. Oh yeah, it's not, I probably should have turned it off just to show, or turned off the AI press conference. I actually thought it was running, but there was a small typo in the code that was stopping it from actually running. This whole time I thought it was running, but it wasn't. So I immediately noticed the speed difference. So I think there's going to be an easy way to kind of abstract out the press conferences for the AI coaches. Because right now what it's doing, it's actually picking reporters and like giving them questions and making them answer them in loops. And so I can kind of just abstract it out and take the ratings of the reporters and then give them, and then have the coaches kind of react back numerically, and then just have it be done in a couple loops versus, you know, going through 3 or 4 reporters with like 3 questions each. Because I have to think about there being like 100, over 100 teams, right? Right now in this world, there's only 32. So you have to think about that as well. Sire says lower end games are trash on the field too. Oh, you mean like high school games kind of being, I don't know what you mean by that. Games for You ask, is this going to be like Out of the Park Baseball? RPG simulation style without the extensive management stuff? Yeah, I don't think of this game as a management sim. It obviously shares stuff with those types of games, but it's not at all what I'm planning on making the game focus on. You obviously need the management stuff, but in the future, I'm thinking more of an adventure game, an adventure RPG type of experience that's set in the 90s and goes really hard on building the game world, building your belief in the game world. So one quick thing about this contract evaluation. It's kind of tough to manage it, because like there's so many different things that have to happen at the exact like right order for all the logic to not mess up. Think of it like a train. Like if one train car kind of goes off track, the whole train's getting derailed because the game expects certain information to be there at certain times, and so if it's not there, it starts to mess up. And so if I just accept, or if I just accept the first option here, it just takes me back and the season starts over, and that seems to work fine. There's no issues there. But I think if I quit just abruptly like this, it'll take me to the home office screen, but I think because logically there should be a head coach at certain points, and because if I just leave, I think it's happening outside of the logic that actually looks to see if there's a head coach and then finds a head coach to hire. So if I go there and I start trying to advance the season, I think some things will start to mess up. But I'll go there anyway, assuming that we can get there. So this is the home office. It's basically a front office without the team stuff. This is actually something that I might kind of look at more in the testing phase. And that's, should you actually start out on a team? Like the way it starts out, you create a character and it just gives you a random high school team. The issue with that is there's incentive to keep basically re-rolling to get a better and better contract. And so I think it was David, he might be in the chat, he might not. I think it was David that suggested that it might be better to actually just start off in the home office and to make, to be able to look at the jobs initially. And so you can look at the different contracts, you can pick out which ones you want, which ones you don't. And so I actually like that idea. The only thing is that I have to be careful about there not being any jobs available, because I don't want the user to be forced through no fault of their own to sit out a season or multiple seasons by chance. And so I kind of have logic for that already, to where if you're looking at the jobs, if there's no jobs, it'll kind of force the worst team to be available to you. That way, there's never a time when you don't have at least the option to have a job. Now, later on, once I implement like the law system, to where like if you have low reputation and the commissioner takes note of that and you get like punished for something, then like the punishments might be like fines and all that. But if it's egregious enough, maybe you're banned for a season. So maybe you have to sit out a season. So you kind of lose all the headway that you would, like getting salary to upgrade your skills. So that's just something that I'll have to look at later. But let's see what Tristan says. I think it would be fun for random events, like the QB showed up. Oh, the QB showed up drunk. You play him, certain characters get a boost and player better, others get a negative modifiers. I'm actually already doing that. That was actually in my little Kanban board that I try to keep up. I actually wanted to implement that in time for the beginning of the pre-alpha testing. And the way it would work is it would be random events. And it would just be stuff like, the QB's car broke down, and so he had to walk to practice. Minus 10 morale. Tight end 3 was injured in practice. Minus 20 health. So you can think of all the possible like flavors for what the events could be, but numerically it would affect, you know, there's mostly their modifiers like their morale, their install, their health, their hidden scouting, which I didn't really talk about in this stream. Maybe on rare occasions it'll actually take away from their skill permanently, like -1 passing or something like that. And so they wouldn't be super frequent, but it would be frequent enough to where you might get a couple throughout a season, give or take. And that way, you'd probably get them in the mail. I think that'd be a good way to do that. To where it would tell you, like, you know, so-and-so player did this thing happened, and the effect was -10 morale or +10 morale or whatever the effect is. That way, the player values aren't as predictable. Because let's say let's say you're on like a 6-game winning streak, your morale is going to be pretty high, or it'll be on the higher side, or at least trending upward. And so you're kind of expecting that. And so if you keep winning, there's like nothing to surprise you. So if you have events like that, first of all, they're really easy to implement because they're chance-based, at least at first. Maybe you can go into like the personality of the character later on and say, okay, this character is more devious, and so there's a higher chance that it's him that gets the negative effect or whatever. But right now it can just be chance-based, just overall. And so every now and then something will happen that will force you, okay, I have to address this. How do I react, right? It's all about the strategic decision making. And on top of that, those are easy things to pick out for the sports shows, which I haven't showed in this stream, but we'll show it here in a bit. So there could be the shows that show you like that are just strictly highlights, which I have a very basic, or not highlights, but I have a basic like weekly recap show working. But it can be stuff like headlines. You know, you go in to all the teams and pick out a few of the random events and say, you know, so and so was, you know, their car broke down, and so they had to walk to practice, or they got into a fight with a teammate, and this happened. And so it starts to help you believe in the game world, and that's what I'm all about, is believing in the game world. That's why I want accurate, like I want believable career arcs. I don't want 15 national championships in a row, no beating teams 100-0, because as soon as I see that, I check out. It's like watching a movie where you have a suspension of disbelief. And so as the movie goes on, you kind of hold back your disbelief. And at a certain point, the movie can jump the shark, and you check out. You know, the illusion breaks down. And so for me, that's how video games work, at least for sports games. So that's kind of what I'm going for. Let me do something here real quick. All of their records have already reset, so that's why it's 0-0, but it's still looking at the results of the previous season. So these screens, I actually don't really like the way they look too much, but I had to put something here. That's what they look like right now. I think this one's even uglier. It's like all the events that happened for each level. It's not very pretty to look at, but hopefully this doesn't break. Okay. So this is the job searching paper. Let me read the chat before it gets too far behind. Let's see. Z64 says, I wonder how the game would have treated me since my weight in high school was only 120 pounds. Granted, as a receiver, I did very little blocking. Yeah, if you're a wide receiver, if you're 120 pounds, you're probably not going to be doing any heavy blocking. Maybe some quick, I forget what they call those. They're not like full blocks. They're just like running into the player just to give the ball carrier like a foot or two of space to move. Tristan says, you hear about legends from the 70s and 80s being drunk all the time. Oh, yeah. I don't want to make it like a soap opera simulator, but I think a little bit of that, I think, would definitely be the thing to do. Games for You says or asks, can there be a random mediocre team be rolled to us if there's no job to get? I was talking about that earlier, and basically what I said was, like, if you're not like banned from coaching for a season, like if you haven't done something wrong in the game, then you should have a job available somewhere. And so the basic technical solution for that is just going to be, it'll give you like the worst high school team. And that's only for the high school level. Like if you're a college coach and no college is currently offering you an interview, which we have interviews in the game as well. Then I don't think the game should force a college to hire you. It's only if you're like at the very bottom of the level. Like let's say you drop out of college and like all you have is our high school teams, or for whatever reason, no college and no pro teams are offering you right now, then you should be able to get at least, the bottom high school team. That way you're not forced out of coaching through no fault of your own. Or at least not a lot of it, right? So my solution to that was just to force the lowest high school team to give you an interview. Jack or Z64 says, my freshman year I played for a homeschool team. I practiced on a softball field right next to my house, so I would always walk to practice. Oh. Well, I guess I mean more like if the player has a car and their car breaks down, they don't want to walk to practice, and so that would affect them. The specific flavor text doesn't really matter that much. It's more about how that affects the game mechanically. But I get your point. Jack Stuff asks, is this going to be a high school or college focused game? This is a high school, college, and pro game. So all three levels are represented in the game world. And it's up to you how it ends up. Maybe you never make it out of high school. Maybe you never make it out of college. Who knows? Maybe you get to college pretty quick and you never leave college. Maybe you get to the pro level pretty quick and you never leave the pro level. It just depends on how it goes, It's not linear. Jack asks, how does that work? Are all the leagues running at the same time on the same save? Yes. All the teams are running at the same time. So there'll be about, I'm thinking like 32, 64, maybe if I can get to like 96 high school teams depending on the state size. But there's only one active state in the world at a time. So it's not like every single state has high school teams. It's only one. So if you happen to, I'm gonna make it to where you can get a job from a different state, but it's gonna be kind of rare. And when that happens, it like changes to where it's only simulating that state now, just to save on resources. Then you got your 100 or so college teams and your 32 pro teams. Jack says, very ambitious. Not necessarily. It's just numbers, really. If you can do it with 32 teams, you can do it with 96 teams. And then you just assign rules, slightly different rules to how that specific league works. It's not, people say it's like ambitious and it's complicated, but it's not. What's hard is making the whole mechanics, making the game world believable, in my opinion. Sire says, sorry, was playing Fortnite while lurking. I had heard Sean say when you do the range ratings, it makes the lower end ratings crap on the field. Yeah, we were talking about that. Tristan asks, or says, just say random flavor to make it feel real. Yeah, they can be random. It can be stuff related to like the modifier. So if it's like morale, it'll be stuff that would affect a person's morale. If it's like install, then it'll be stuff about like football IQ. If it's health, then it'll be stuff related to injuries and stuff like that. And then later on, I can add stuff specific to each level. So stuff you'd expect to hear from high school, stuff you'd expect to hear from college, and stuff you'd expect to hear from professional. So you'd have like a general pool of events and then like 3 specific ones that it can draw from. But you explained that pretty well. Games for You says, I wonder if I could be like Bill Belichick, going pro and then get fired and play for a good college football team. Well, if it's not linear, then it'll be however it plays out. D64 says, the way I'd explain it is it isn't based on any type of football specifically. It's based on your coach. Yeah. All right. So what I was saying about the job search paper is that I like this as a way to look for jobs. So I did resign. So it says, this is the headline. It resigns, or it says the head coach resigns from the team. It says he finished with 1 season tenure with 20% win percentage and 0 district titles. It tells you the contract length and how much it was for, which is pretty high, on the higher end for high school coaches. It tells you what league you're looking at over here. There's only 1 page right now. This name here is an actual name of a reporter that covers this team. That's kind of a cool thing. So if you were ever to read an article written by this guy, and you were, let's say you got hired by that team, you would probably see him in the press conference, which is a cool little world building thing. And this article is actually generated as well. The structure is simple. It's just an elaborate Mad Libs game that's based on different things about the coach, and picks out data from the season, previous seasons, and all that stuff. Picks out the names of like the athletic director, and it picks out player names, and then here's some results, mostly losses, but there it tells you this coach, which is actually our character, they beat St. Anthony 10-7. They beat Kellogg 17-10. They got blown out by Chubbuck 0-20. So all this, as long as you keep the data and you don't make it like so big to where it starts to hog like storage space, you can save all this stuff for later reference. If you can do that, it just adds so much to the world, because that's stuff you'd expect to see in a newspaper. And the structure's pretty simple, but the reason why I did this was because initially just the headline, the sub-headline, and like the contract information, that was the only thing that was readable. Everything else was dummy text. And it was just bothering me. Like, I didn't want to see, squiggly lines here. But I also thought, man, do I really want to make an entire article generator? Are people going to read it? Some will, some won't. Some will sometimes, some will not always, But just the fact that you can go in, and if this was developed a little bit more, which planning on doing that, it's just, it adds to the game world. And again, I want to believe in the world. So you see stuff like that, and it's like, oh, you can see when he was hired in 1979, one of his contract goals was 50% win percentage. Gives you a little statement about his class, which he's an emotional class, so it talks about emotion, his emotion, and all that stuff. Talks about the previous team's record before he was hired. The reaction to the news that he resigned, and I think that stuff is cool. Like, to me, this stuff is important. It's probably not more important than the core stuff, but having this be part of the believability of the game world is definitely one of my goals. So the way this works is that there should be a round number, but it's a decimal for some reason. It has a reputation requirement based on the AD. So the AD, but right now I'm minus 25 reputation. So this job wouldn't be available to me, even though it says 100%. That doesn't work right now. And they prefer prestige over legacy. So both are 0 right now. Let's see. Can I apply to this? Curious, did that break something? Oh, it did. Show all. Oh, I see. The interview game does work. It's just I haven't been here for a while. I haven't been here in a while. I think I changed the name of a function. Let's see. Show all. I'm just doing a little bit of a see what that was from. just going to comment that out for now. Restart the game. Right. Well, that's running. Let's see. Games for you says when starting the game and getting an interview for a job, what will happen if you do poorly with a job interview? Like, gets you low-end jobs or more options? That's a good question. If you fail the interview, which the interview game is... Let's see. Oops. There we go. If you... We'll just start a new one. Another thing that I added was being able to delete these in the game, which is nice. If you fail interviews right out the gate, well, I'm thinking that eventually the game will have you start out with no job, and then you'll have a number of interview options. And if you keep failing those, it is a good question. Because you don't want to be, you don't want to start the game and then like not be able to play the game, right? If there were just so many teams, it would just be statistically impossible that you couldn't get onto a team. But with there being like 32, 64 high school teams, something like that, I don't know. It does make sense if that's a possibility to just give you a random team and say this is your team starting out. I don't know. That's a problem for later, but we definitely wouldn't want the player to not actually be able to play. What else can I cover? We're running at 1:43, so try to keep it no more than 2 hours. Guess we'll... Oh, so this is the coach duties here. So he wants 4, this guy wants 5. This guy wants 6. And so that means that he's going to want 6 offensive duties. So he's something, he'd be someone you'd want if you want to delegate more, and then someone like this would be someone you would want to hire if you wanted to control more. So like here you can see the head coach has 7, the OC has 5 out of 5, the DC has 5 out of 5. So it's pretty even right there. Let's say I don't want to do scouting. I just hand it off to Clifford here. and I try to advance, it's going to tell me, hey, you need to give him the duties that he wants. So I'm like, okay, well, I'll give you the depth chart then. Or I'll give you weight training. Or I guess he wants less. But we'll take over the training. And then same thing for defense. And then we got the equipment manager and all that, so. There's our tryouts, which I think is a pretty simple. It's based off of a quick scouting report. So it'll tell you high, moderate, low, and an accuracy percentage. So this is a pretty good report. Most of these are in the right place. And if you want, you can apply points to scouting. So putting 1 shows you these chevrons and how many traits and abilities they have. And then 2 just shows you the numbers and the actual traits and abilities that they do have. And then you go in and you make your cuts. But I'm not the scout, so I have to trust whatever the OC and DC decided. So pretty simple, I feel like. And the training is also pretty simple. All you're looking at here is, do I want a low, moderate, or high plan? The low plan is going to give you the least amount of experience boost and the greatest amount of morale and health boost. So I have to go in and decide, okay, do I want to, basically, do I want to go easy on this guy, give him a chance to recover? Do I want to kind of keep it in the middle so there's no morale or health boost and you just have kind of a moderate EXP percentage boost? And high is they're losing health but gaining the most experience. And so as the seasons go by, players are going to be in different places. Let's see. For example, this guy has 59 health currently. I might want to bump that up to 84 with the low plan. And so you kind of just look at your modifiers. You look at where their experience is and you just kind of set it like that. So it's a quick setting for all the players. And so you may not even be controlling this. You may only be controlling half like this. Like I can't control these. So that's pretty cool. Results. So that is the district bracket. And this is the playoff bracket. Which at first I was trying to figure out how can I fit this whole bracket in the screen, but then I thought, oh, I can just use a window and control the bracket like this. So, looks pretty cool, I guess. This is the press conference. All you're doing here is they basically force you to make decisions. It's like, okay, do I want to lose install to this guy, or this guy? If I don't want to answer this question, I can try to attempt a subject change. I won that 6-2, so now he's asking a positive question. It's a pretty simple thing. And you just go in and so you can see that certain coaches or certain reporters are easier to change the subject on than others. This guy's a 21. I have a media value of 10. I only have 1 interview point left. And media is scaled by charisma. So, kind of low. I probably want to... And I think you can go negative experience. So they're already at 0, so I'll take the hit there. But you can see how that would work, and then so that's my results, that's the OC's results, and that's the DC's result. Overall, a pretty simple system, and it's not overly complicated. I feel like there's no optimal solution to the press conference, which is what I like. I want it to be based on preference, and then whatever your thoughts are. That's done. Here's the game summary. Stats are not too bad with how the fast sim is fine-tuned right now. But so what I'll do now is I'll just advance season a couple games. I actually left the oven on, I just remembered. Oops. I was planning on cooking something, but it's okay. I'll cook it after this. I just wanted to show the broadcast real quick, which I've done on other streams, but just for those that haven't seen it. Just to show you what I mean by, like, I want the user to believe in the game world. I want to believe in the game world. Oh, there's a letter. It's a fan. Dear Coach Hegney, superb coaching, stellar mastery in defeating Yukon. Okay. So what happens here is if I try to advance, fan and critic mail is mandatory. So you have to answer it. So I have to go back. I have to deal with this. So I can either pick +5 reputation or bank of 12k. Now 12k sounds like a lot, but it's really not. I'll take the rep. That's it. And if I wanted to, I can either keep this or I can just put it in the trash. Now it's gone. So if you go over to CSPN, you go to broadcasts, there's the standings. Not too crazy there. Still need to work on the awards. There's a lot of bench players that shouldn't be in here. And the numbers, you know, stats are all over the place. But if we go to broadcasts, here's Friday night, which is the high school broadcast, weekly recap show. So it says the Vermilions take the road trip to Jerome, but can they rally to victory? The citizens navigate to Chibuk, but can they command the game? Coach Darren DeMays heads the charge with his beasts as he pursues his 5th win. Hello folks, I am your host Greg Smith, and I am joined as always by Phil Stick. Welcome to CSPN Friday night. It's week 9 in the Idaho football season. We're back at CSPN, ready to bring you the week's best moments. Let's get started. So I'd like there to be, like, at the very least, a text-to-speech engine here that can generate an audio file for this. It'll play it back to you. That way you can get some kind of voice. I think text-to-speech is so much, the potential is so much higher because I don't have to Mad Libs together like all these audio clips, which is how they did it in 2K5, NFL 2K5. The only problem is how can you run it locally and how good is it going to sound? There is a text-to-speech engine called Piper that I found. And actually, it sounds, it doesn't sound like Microsoft SAM. It's actually pretty good, and it runs locally, and it doesn't seem like it's that resource intense. And so I'm thinking that I could probably use Piper. It runs in command line, so I don't know if I can get Godot, or I'm actually using Redo. But if I can get the game engine to call up command line and run Piper, feed it this text, this string, have it generate an audio file. It'll probably have to generate it beforehand, like go through all the slides and generate audio files for them. That might take a little bit of processing time. And then you have all the audio files to play the entire show, which I think would be the best way to do that. The only thing is I think I have to train new voices, because the voices that they have available for Piper are not, they don't sound like TV personalities, so I'm not sure how that's going to work. But Z64 says it would fit the theme of old games because they sounded very artificial when they did voices. Yeah, like Joe Montana, Sports Talk. They had a text-to-speech audio system. But I'm thinking more like PS1 and 64, Dreamcast. So those games didn't have robotic voices. And the technology is there, for example, the Piper engine, to run on a fairly modest computer. And like, you don't need to go to, it doesn't have to be connected to the internet. You can do it all locally. And then that way you can generate all of your voices on your own computer. That would be ideal. I think I can do it. I just have to go back to it. I haven't tested Piper in a long time. That was back when I was doing the other game engine before I switched. So yeah, some of these logos, I'm sure you guys have seen this duck logo before. It's in a couple games. Let's go down to New Plymouth. The Royals welcome the Ducks. New Plymouth came out on top against State Line in a close game. For the Royals, it puts them on a 4-game winning streak. For State Line, this game makes it their 5th loss of the season. Phil is taking us into the detailed stats. Some of these lines are a little funny, or kind of not the most well constructed, because I automated the process a little bit, so some of these are a little funny. So New Plymouth threw for 97 yards and rushed for 78. Somehow they won with that. State Line threw for 188 and ran for 145. New Plymouth capitalized on their running backs and receivers when it counted in this one. State Line should explore more creative offensive strategies to lighten the load on their key players. So it just keeps doing that over and over. It's a very simple structure at the moment, but it can be built on and built on and built on and built on to where you'll never see the same thing twice. There's 1,000 different templates, and to where, you know, the possibilities are endless. So it knows their winning and losing streaks. It knows the point differential. Obviously, the team locations. Newdale threw for 448 yards and ran for 175. Meanwhile, Burley threw for 283 and ran for 129. Newdale let their opponents stay in the game and were ultimately outplayed. Burley left everything on the field and put points on the board in this game. Z64 says, well, the N64 didn't have robotic voices, but they still didn't exactly sound real either. Well, those were actual audio recordings. They were just crunched down because they couldn't run it at super high quality. But the PS1 had recorded audio, like Game Day, Game Breaker had audio from Keith Jackson. What was it? Game Day had play-by-play commentary too. That was on the PS1. So they did have commentary. It wasn't that varied, and it was crunched down to a degree. So it wasn't text to speech. And they were pieced together, making them sound disjointed. Yeah, that's what happens when you're playing Mad Libs with the audio generation system. There's a lot of little transitions between words that are hard to capture when you're trying to build a a bank of all these different possible words. 2K5 did it pretty well. It's Chris Berman. But it wasn't just Chris Berman's voice. If you look back at NFL Primetime 2002, the PS2 game, that had Chris Berman and what's his name? Johnson. Tom Jackson, I think. They were doing play-by-play, and it was all right, but 2K5 just, I guess they pieced them together better, the transitions. If it was text-to-speech, so some of the, like Piper, the transition between words, it's all generated, so it's all put together by the engine. And so you can feed it this entire little paragraph here, and it doesn't sound cut out, like pieced together, because it's all generated together. And the voice quality doesn't sound exactly like an audio recording of a human voice, but it's also pretty far ahead of Microsoft SAM. And so the challenge there is training a new voice so it sounds something like a TV personality. So even having this basic structure, I think is really cool, and I can just keep adding on to it. So Konami made that one. Yeah. I really hate that Konami, their basketball game, NBA Tonight, the 2002 version, is actually my favorite of that series. It later became NBA Starting 5, and that was actually a pretty good basketball game. It was like Winning 11. It felt like Winning 11, the soccer game, but basketball, because Winning 11 was made by Konami too. And Winning 11 is an excellent soccer game. Particularly number 6 is the one I played the most. Konami, you know, they knocked it out of the park with winning 11. I feel like they did a really good job with what they had with NBA Tonight 2002. It was a great use of the ESPN license. And then it just the court gameplay wasn't, you know, highest tier at the time. But I just played it in coach mode, so it doesn't matter to me. It's good enough for Sim Engine. But I wish that NFL Primetime 2002 was as good of a football game that the NBA game was, a basketball game. But I think, yeah, we're at 2 hours already. We talked about a lot of stuff. Hopefully enough about the pre-alpha testing, which is what I wanted to talk about. Yes, the one before that was NBA Tonight on Dreamcast. I think it was on a couple platforms. And I think their previous basketball games were... What was it? I think it was like Fast Break, maybe? Or Inside... Was it Inside Drive? I forget which one. But it was a Konami basketball game before the Tonight series. I'm sure it was the same engine that they just kept adding to as they advanced in the console generation. But I think we've been on for long enough. That's kind of more or less what I'm looking at for the pre-alpha testing. The stuff that I wanted to look at and focus on. Yeah, in the zone. That's what it was. That's the stuff I wanted to focus on, was just the roster building stuff. Bugs, UI navigation. And then the plan for the actual testing phase was to add the college pro screens and then some kind of play calling system. Call that an alpha build, and then continue to test that and refine that, and then eventually move into beta. And beta is going to be once we actually have a working field engine, animation engine of some kind. Because then we'll have all 3 levels. We'll have play calling, team management, and a field engine. And that's approaching a complete game. The timeline, I think we can get through the pre-alpha stage in a couple months. I don't think it'll take that long to actually make the actual screens. What's going to be challenging is making sure all the logic of the different levels, you know, adds up correctly, and it doesn't take too many resources to make it work with the way I'm doing it. So, but I think that's gonna do it for me. Hope you guys enjoyed it. Thanks to everyone who's in the chat. Pretty busy chat tonight. 264 games for you. Tristan, Jack, Sire. We had Sean in for a while at the beginning. Marquee PC Gaming. David. That's gonna do it for me. I hope you guys enjoyed it, and I'll be seeing you guys in the next one.